As we set up for our next panel, I do want to let you know that we have a poll right now that we'd like to present here, if you look on the screen. And again, if you haven't been able to access the polls, it's pigeonhole.at. You can find the polls there on your phone, and you can enter your vote. So the question is, do you believe that there should be restrictions placed on AI to mitigate the spread of misinformation, or are there alternative approaches that should be considered? Restrictions are necessary, alternative approaches should be considered, or are you unsure? So please enter your vote for this poll. You can find it on your phone. Do you believe that there should be restrictions placed on AI to mitigate the spread of misinformation, or are there alternative approaches that should be considered? And if you are having trouble finding the poll, please do let us know and we can help you out with that. Again, it's at pigeonhole.at. Restrictions are necessary, alternative approaches should be considered, or are you unsure? We'll let that play out for a moment before I introduce the next panel. And it appears right now we're between restrictions are necessary and alternative approaches should be considered. Well, we have a conversation on this issue right now. This is about artificial intelligence and misinformation. Please welcome our moderator, Misha Zelinsky, and our esteemed panel.
Thank you very much. So, very relevant poll. We're going to be talking a lot about misinformation, AI. AI is such a big topic, so limiting it right down into disinformation, misinformation, but even more limiting it down into generative AI, I think is going to be very important for our conversation. Someone that's been studying authoritarianism, following the rise of dictators, and the influence around the world. On your list of people that are threats to democracy, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, a guy by the name of Pablo Xavier was not on my list at the start of this year. Now, who's he? He's a 31-year-old construction worker from Chicago who famously put together the deep fake Pope image in March of this year. And that's something that immediately alerted me, the ubiquitousness of this technology, the ease of use, and the ability to create images that are not real, that our eyes are not able to detect as real. Profound implications. We've already got a situation, we all understand this problem, of an information ecosystem where we're no longer able to determine common sets of facts, common sets of reality, and democracies just can't function in that environment. And into that, we're going to be dropping the ability to literally no longer be able to determine what's fake, what's real on an image-based basis. And so, the problem with that, of course, just democracy, what does that mean? What we're seeing is the transfer of online discord, disinformation into real-world consequences. Jan 6, obviously, but we had January 8 in Brazil, trucker convoy. We've got people taking online radicalisation into acts of violence in the real world. And so the idea that anyone can do this is profound. And so when I think about authoritarianism, what is their task? It's not about convincing someone of a different reality that this happened or that happened. It's that fact that anything could have happened. Once anything could have happened and nothing is true, essentially cynicism reigns. And in cynicism, that is toxic and poison to democracy. So you can count me down as someone ultra super duper freaked out about the prospect of generative AI being dropped into this already polluted ecosystem of information, and what we're seeing is just pulling down democratic discourse. So, Reggie, I'm going to throw to you first. You've got the ear of Washington. You're on the President's Council, so you can speak for the President if you like. But basically, am I right to be freaked out? We've got thousands of leaders early this year who are specialists in tech and all manner of areas touching on this area of technology, calling for a pause on AI, which we obviously did not do. But am I right, or is this a storm in a teacup?
Well, yeah, it should be freaked out.
Oh, good.
No,
End panel.
right? Everybody run. No, I think a couple of things. Part of what freaks us out, what unsettles us a bit is, quite frankly, just a lack of understanding around what the technology is, how it operates, and that sort of thing. I think we all have a role to play in this thing called AI. And so let me try to, if I can, dispel a couple of what might be kind of popular myths. First, AI is not a thing. It is not a product. It is not a feature. AI is a life cycle. Right? AI is comprised of data that gets generated, acquired, accumulated, put into training data sets that turn into models that make decisions. Those decisions then get deployed in any number of ways, right? So in that regard, we all have a part to play in this AI life cycle, if you will. Generative, you mentioned, Misha, the generative movement has captured a lot of the world's attention, and understandably so. It's super cool. I geek out on it too, right? But it is a strand of AI. What we should recognize is that AI as a technology, as a set of algorithmic techniques, have been with us for years, right? So if anyone navigated here today, if anyone used Uber today, if anyone talked to Google or Alexa today or yesterday, like all of that is AI as well. So that stuff hasn't harmed us at scale, but some of the things that we're seeing, deepfakes and those sorts of things, we are concerned about in terms of that erosion of trust, as you mentioned. You know, if you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer from last year, what they suggest is that NGOs, governments, are considered kind of unethical, incompetent, and right now business is the only one kind of holding it up. So I think there's an opportunity for business to kind of help bring others to the right side of the quadrant there. The other thing, you mentioned the notice, the pause. You know, I think, you know, I spend a lot of time in data ethics, responsible AI. Responsible AI has to include responsible rhetoric about AI. And I do believe that it's, first of all, it's just bad business to tell people that I built something is going to kill you and there's nothing you can do about it, right? That just doesn't make a lot of sense from a business perspective. But also it just panics people. Right. And I think we have to do a better job in the tech community to not panic people, because at the end of the day, it doesn't breed trust and it certainly doesn't drive adoption. So I think we have to be a lot more responsible about our rhetoric. Let's focus on the things that can happen, right? And let's take some of those science fiction probabilities and put them in their proper place.
Mike, I want to bring you in here. So you talked about creating products that can kill you and there's nothing you can do about it. You know, there's very few areas of the economy you can point to where essentially you can create a product and not have to be exposed to regulatory hurdles. I couldn't just create a vaccine, throw it out there and just see what happens. And yet tech has seemingly flipped the script here in terms of they create things and then we all have to grapple with how to regulate them thereafter. And so the question I got is, you know, should AI, particularly in this, where it touches up against democracy, and limiting it down to Reggie's point, you know, should it be more heavily regulated? And is there a case for, perhaps, you know, to ask a crunchier question, is there a case for banning something like the use of generative AI with images and deepfakes before we actually know how to use them safely, if at all?
Well, you have to be very careful about the concept of banning something that can't be banned. I mean, you know, what computational tools are is there are ways in which we accelerate our thinking, accelerate our rate of calculation, accelerate the way that we can work together. And so the old Borg phrase from Star Trek is resistance is futile, which is true. But having said that, then one has to bring a level of sophistication that we're really historically incapable of bringing to new technologies as they're rolling out. We still refuse to focus energy on what we call technology assessment. We refuse to look at the negative implications. All technologies have negative implications. All new developments have negative implications. Congress did away with the Office of Technology Assessment, which was a really creative idea 40 years ago. They did away with it. They don't want to have any notion about what these technologies might do because somehow they think that that would affect the market or the market forces or the market outcome. So what we have here is we have this moment in our history as a species where we've built these little tools that we're euphemistically calling artificial intelligence, which are really a way of hugely, unbelievably powerful human enhancement, individual enhancement, speeded decision-making, broader decision-making, complex decision-making, complexity management, all these kinds of things. It should come with regulations, everything does. It should come with training, it should come with everything that people are worried about. This notion of it's either or, there is no either or, it's it. It is moving forward, it's already embedded, as Reggie said. It's moving forward computationally in unbelievable ways going forward at the university that I'm the president of, with 80,000 students on campus and 95,000 learners in degree programs online and 500,000 other learners who are not in degree programs, with that group of several hundred thousand people and the 25 million people that are gaining access to us digitally. You know, we're flashing green light, proceed with caution. Up your game. Everyone has to up their game. So a lot of us are mentally lazy. I mean, we
especially journalists, man.
No, I don't know about journalists, but I mean, mentally lazy is that we're unwilling to sort of see how we got to where we are, assuming that whatever it was that got to where we are is different than where we are with where we want to go, when in fact they're the same. It's just accelerated. So what we need is careful, we're calling it flashing green light, flashing yellow light, lots of new ways of thinking about things, but at the root of things, we've got to start doing technology assessment before the atomic bomb is detonated in 1945 and before the systems are deployed, so we understand where we're going.
Right. And so, yeah, you've made the case there for regulation, and I know I accelerate at flashing yellow lights. I don't know what I do with a flashing green light, but...
It means you turn carefully because there's traffic and you got to be a little bit careful.
Right, okay, well, we don't...
You can go, but be careful.
All right, so perfect way to pivot to you, Yalda. I want to bring you into this. You've got a very long and amazing background in looking after child safety online, exposing child exploitation that we've seen, which has really been accelerated through dark web, but also platforms and the use of essentially information ecosystems that have very little control over. And so this threat of AI, fake images, deep fakes, etc., is that going to make this problem worse or better in your view?
Absolutely worse.
Good.
So AI is really deepening the crisis of online child safety. Just to give you a bit of background, child sexual abuse material has increased 10,000 folds in the last 2 decades, leaving law enforcement agents completely crippled under insurmountable amount of data that they're actually really incapable of dealing with. To give you an idea of the volume, before it went to further encrypt Messenger, Facebook reported 40 million images of child sexual abuse to the National Agency for Missing and Exploited Kids. And this is before artificial intelligence entered the conversation. This rapid advent of artificial intelligence is having 3 very deep consequences, 3 very disturbing consequences on the world of online child safety. First of all, we're seeing a very strong radicalizing effect of normalizing this behavior of online child sexual abuse. The Internet Watch Foundation sounded the alarm on outstandingly realistic images of children being abused online, some as young as 3. And as a result, the National Crime Agency estimates that 1.6% of adults present a certain danger to children. So what's happening is this mass consumption of this toxic material online is triggering them to be more dangerous to children in the real world. And then in a sea of deep fakes, as you can imagine, it's incredibly difficult for law enforcement agencies to be able to identify which children are real and actually need saving and need protection, making it virtually impossible for them to protect, detect, and prosecute these crimes being committed against children.
Very troubling. So, Igor, I want to bring you in as someone that's actually worked in the sector, has a vast expertise, having used artificial intelligence in business and been very successful at that. I think we've probably covered the field here that big tech's got a pretty patchy record when it comes to whether regulation, but self-regulation. And so I'm wondering whether or not we can trust companies to get this right, because when I think about social media, so-called social media, or essentially globalized platforms, no media institution's ever had such great reach and power to influence information. And so we went from essentially these platforms, which were more or less, as we understood them, created to share photos with people that we avoided outside of Christmas, to destroying democracy in like 10 years, right? And into that, we've got a whole heap of new threats emerging. And so I think about something like the Manhattan Project. You talked about the Manhattan Project there, Michael, the nuclear bomb, 1945. Very heavily regulated, important piece of technology, but very heavily regulated. We didn't just have Albert Einstein, a bunch of kids smashing together atoms in their parents' basement, right? And so has the industry lost the privilege of self-regulation here? How do you see that?
Well, this is an industry that attracts the highest concentration of man children compared to any other industry, right?
Mate, I come from politics, so I don't know if that's right. But anyway, we can debate that later.
I don't know.
Put a poll up.
So they like saying things like similar to what Reggie said, turns of phrases like if software is eating the world, then AI is its teeth. Anybody that says that, that's a pretty good reminder that they weren't part of the old guard. The old guard of AI, I've been doing it for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years in some cases for members of our R&D team. We started working in AI to do what? To create accessible interfaces for folks, especially for those that were handicapped. We were building machine translation in order to bridge cultures and increase understanding. That's why we were doing AI. So if you can imagine us as toy makers, as tool makers, we were imagining hammers that we would put in the hands of Jimmy Carter so that he could build Habitat for Humanity. We had no inkling that it would ever be in the hands of a serial killer like Ted Bundy. That was the farthest, from our aspirations or understanding. I gave a talk on disinformation with Lieutenant Colonel Vidman and one of the recent South by Southwest. We predicted the dawn of that type of decentralization a while back before the rise of ChatGPT and their ilk, like Stable Diffusion and whatnot, to produce these images. And so what you're going to see, certainly before the end of the decade, is the fact that the web as we know it died last year, right? We could all go and search for images, text, music, videos, and the like, and we would see the expression of human creativity last year. That was the last year we could see that. By the end of this decade, the vast majority of it is going to be generative content. And so what you're going to see is a fallback position, especially for very robust organizations, enterprises that need to keep our lights on, that need to keep our hospitals operating and things of that sort. They're going to need to create the equivalent of a seed bank like exists in the Nordics for what truth is so that they continue driving these workflows, because what you're going to see out there is going to become a hall of mirrors. So that's what we're foreseeing. As far as public discourse and disinformation and social media and elections, that's going to be a world of hurt, because that used to be troll farms that
Right.
needed to essentially manually construct these A/B tests to find the weak-willed in our various communities to essentially sow discord. And now that could be done in somebody's basement. By the way, Silicon Valley Bank collapse practically could have taken out the whole innovation ecosystem, not just in the US, but worldwide. And that was started by one individual writing a newsletter. And that was accidental.
Well, that's still very positive. I'm getting more freaked out as we go here, but Yalda, very quickly, and I might get others to jump in this too. The big tech platforms, they're kind of the choke point here at the moment, at least, for the information ecosystems. So they at least have the ability to throttle this information. Should they be doing more, and is there an obligation on them to do something, or should we be forcing them to do something through government regulation? Very quickly.
Yes, so big tech companies are acting with impunity and harming users because effectively they have undisputed economic power. They operate under the assumption that if you feed 10,000 children and you poison 50 of them, that's an acceptable rate considering the scale. In any other industry, if you sell a faulty product to a child, you're put out of business. And big tech companies are not only giving the infrastructure to perpetrators, but they're enabling them to thrive. If you look at the broadcasting industries, broadcasters have very strict rules and liabilities when it comes to the content that they produce, and very strict legal and financial ramifications if they fail to respect the law.
So, Reggie, I might just bring you here as well, because you're in DC a lot and you're having these conversations. Do you think that there is a case based on what Yalda's just saying?
Yeah, so back to the statement that Dr. Crow made, we have to be careful about suggesting that we're going to regulate or ban something that you actually can't enforce. Look, human beings have lied for a long time.
Maybe
right?
forever.
Maybe forever. And what we've got now is infrastructure that allows us to lie at scale, right? So while certainly government has a role to play, I always like to go back to us as individuals. We also have roles to play, right? So if you don't like what you're seeing on Twitter or X or Facebook or whatever the other social media platforms are. Get off. It really is that simple. If you are absorbing all of the information and taking it all as true, you shouldn't, right? So I think there are some basics that we have to make sure we get baked into our curricula, right? From a K-12 perspective, I think as enterprises, we have to make sure that we are informing our workforces as well, because this has a very real economic impact as well, if we really want to get down to it. And certainly our governments have a role to play with respect to ensuring that we have a more digitally literate and media literate citizenry.
Right, we're going to do a quick speed round. Next year, 2024, 2 billion people are going to the polls.
Yeah.
And we're brushing up against all these challenges that Igor's touched on and everything we've spoken about. So, positive or bearish on AI's threat to democracy based on everything you've just heard? Positive or bearish?
Bearish.
There's a threat, but we need to eliminate anonymity.
So, positively bearish?
Yes.
Bearishly positive?
We can do some things. You have to show your identity. It changes everything.
Interesting point. Positive or bearish?
Obvious. Bearish.
Bearish?
I'm going to say positively bearish, given the options. I do think our federal system allows us to have a unique setup that's slightly different than some other electoral setups. But
Positively bearish is the best we can offer you. But I was going to finish on the quote. I always laugh at it, don't trust everything on the internet based on Reggie's point, basically, what attributed to Abraham Lincoln, I believe that quote. But I actually want to finish on my favorite quote in this space. It's a little bit counterintuitive. It's George Orwell, the end of 1984. He said, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. But to save democracy, to Reggie's point, we might actually have to reject the evidence of our eyes and ears thanks to deepfakes." So anyway, round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much for paying attention.